And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Cathy Mortimer, nurse who had a childhood near-death experience, which we're going to learn about and more. Cathy, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Hi, thank you, Jeff.
Cathy,
It's going to be fun.
Yes, it is. And if you don't mind, Cathy, let's start on the day that you had the experience and go from there.
Sure. Well, I was almost 6 years old. It was August. I could probably figure it out to the day because my mother was allowing me to go out and play with the big kids in the neighborhood. I was starting first grade, so I could go out and play with them. But being a preschooler, I really didn't get the kind of exercise to climb safely up on trees and not fall off. And that's exactly what I did. So I was up there, up at the street, a tree, it was an old apple orchard, and the tree had fallen over, and the kids were climbing up and over. And, I did the same thing. The second time I did it, I fell back this way and landed flat on my back, getting the wind knocked out of me. It was probably, I would guess, 5 feet. I fell 5 feet to the ground. And I'm struggling really hard to breathe. Just, it probably looked like I was convulsing, just trying to get the air in, and it wouldn't come in. So after the third attempt of trying to inhale, I just surrendered and started traveling into this dark space, just quickly, until these two beings, very tall. If you know anything about the artist Edward Gorey, he would draw these really tall, lanky, skinny people, and they looked like that. But they were robed, and it was a dark space. One of them put their hand out and said, "Stop." So I stopped and I looked up. I didn't know where I was. I didn't feel uncomfortable. I wasn't scared. It was just a total neutral feeling. I still felt like I had a body, and they just wanted me to go back. But I told them I couldn't. Now, the two of them would look at each other, and this was all telepathic. And then only one would address me and said, "Go back." I said, "I can't." They looked at each other. "Why not?" "I can't breathe." They looked at each other. The other one who spoke or communicated said, "Well, we'll help you with that." And there's a moment of hesitation, but I'm a child. I'm going to believe the adults in the room. And yet sometimes I've wondered through the years if I was given, as a lot of NDers have these, they don't want to go back. So they're shown their lives, especially if they have children. You're going to grow up and leave your children. And they're almost persuaded to go back. And I was living in a tumultuous home. I had a tumultuous home life with 4 older brothers who were very aggressive. And I was super, super sensitive, and their aggression was just overwhelming at times. So sometimes I wonder if in that moment of before I said yes, if they had to persuade me. Sometimes the NDers, the memory is removed. And the reason I say this is because I have a lot of deja vus and a lot of experiences that make me think I was persuaded. But I'll talk about that later. Well, I said, okay. And immediately I'm laying on my back in my body, and I feel a breath being given to me. And when my lungs were about halfway full, I took the breath on my own, and my eyes started to flutter awake while I'm hearing the kids go, "Oh, what do we do? What, we get help? Is she dead?" Ricky Ryan neighbors is, "I'm gonna go get help," and starts getting up to go while oh, wait, she's waking up. My eyes are fluttering open. I'm breathing. I figure I was on the ground maybe 3 to 5 minutes the most. Kids are very fast, and once they see someone's on the ground not moving, they're very quick to react. So it wasn't that long that I was on the ground. And I got up. My normal chatty Cathy self could not say a single word because I was thinking, what was that? Who were those people? And why couldn't I breathe? And where did I go? I mean, all these questions in my head, all I wanted to do was go home and tell my mother, which I did. I got up. Ricky sees me, comes back because he's going for help. And he said, what happened to you? What happened? We, I was going to go get help. And I'm just shaking my head. I, I don't know. I go home. I tell my mother I fell out of a tree. I'm not injured. I may be a little dusty. And she's like, really? Really, Kathleen? That's what she called me. And I'm going, uh, uh, hmm. There's no words. There's no words for what happened. I never spoke of it until I was involved in my 40s in IANS because of a friend and just happened to tell the story. Oh, at a meeting. I was, oh, nobody had an NDE to share. So I said, well, I got a story and brought it up. So the space between then and then has been a really long journey of understanding that I had developed more psychic ability. The telepathy in me became potent. I couldn't be denied. I may have been born with, I know I was born with a lot of super sensitivity, but it became much more acute. And I also remember, and this was part of that, did they give me memories so that I would be persuaded? I remember saying to myself, I have to learn to live in this earthly world, this earthly realm. I don't know anything about that. I can't figure it out. I don't know how to talk about it or tell anybody. So I'm just going to push it aside and maybe I'll figure it out. Meanwhile, I'm growing up with psychic abilities and knowledge that is just, not easy to handle. Uh, and I just felt I had to keep it a secret. And I did that because I had a very mentally ill mother who was raising 5 of us kids by herself. And she would sit by the sink and talk to these 2, I'll call them beings. I really don't know. She called them Elizabeth and Charles. Elizabeth helped her raise her family and to deal with the kids, and Charles was her companion. And she would laugh and they'd joke, and I couldn't see these beings or whatever. Who's she talking to? And because I went to the other side and was talking to these other beings, I was going like, is that the same as that? And what is that? Am I going to be like that, my mother, because I had that? And so I spent my childhood trying to figure that out. But because I couldn't readily figure it out, and to see and to understand her torment as a mentally ill woman in a time when the treatment for paranoid schizophrenia and other types of psychosis was torture. So it was terrifying to think that I would have the same fate. And not only that, she, she, we inherited some level of neuroatypical, a nervous system that was not typical, let's say, to varying degrees. One of her sons ended up with paranoid schizophrenia. He's still alive. And so on. I can list the illnesses. The other brother committed suicide when he was 27. My oldest brother probably has borderline, and he will admit to having OCD. And then another brother, I believe, has Asperger's. Now they won't go and get help and get these diagnoses. So through my career and my interest in psychology and psychiatry, obviously psychotherapy, I had to try to figure out, why are these men so different and difficult? Out of 5 kids, there's no kids. None of us, I'm the only one who married. So out of 5 kids, only one of us married, and there are no grandchildren of my parents. So that says something about the mental stability of the family that I grew up in, being the youngest, and the fear of being tormented by mentally illness plagued me. And I worked so hard for my mental stability. And now that I have this, now that I'm older, having gone through that part, and can now talk about the psychic experiences, my interest in metaphysics and mental health, focusing on the mental health, I really want to be able to help people listen to their stories and know and say to them genuinely, you're not crazy, you're psychic. You're going through an awakening, or you're going through this, because I studied this my whole life and I can tell the difference. I could look at somebody who I know has a mental health problem and know it's a mental health problem and how to talk to them because of my family. But apparently, if we choose our if we choose what we're going to do in this lifetime, that's what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to have this life. And it was torment, because the brothers abused me. My mother was too sick to care for me. When she got too sick, I moved in with my father at age 7. He's a man of another just generation that doesn't take care of children, especially ones that are dependent. So there was medical neglect. There was all kinds of, I just sort of raised myself. And because there wasn't real guidance, there wasn't any knowledge about these kinds of things that there is now. My brothers and my mother and father really suffered. They really suffered. They had nowhere to turn and talk about weird stuff, or even normal stuff that we could treat with medication now. And so that's why I'm really into this mental health stuff, in order to help people to calm them and really figure out where it is. So my autistic brother, let me say, we have a very strong telepathic uh, connection, and he's autistic. And some of my more recent research now is about autistic people who are nonverbal, or even my clients who've been nonverbal. And I've used my telepathic ability to communicate with them. And now that's becoming a thing. People are learning more about telepathy, and it's becoming more above board, because I've met a lot of people who I've been telepathic with. They don't want other people to know that they can hear you, or you can hear them. And I thought, well, why would you want to tell them that you can hear them? And so, but I sat once while I was having my own spiritual awakening about, no, Cathy, that's real. All this stuff that you've experienced through your childhood with your psychic abilities, you were having these actual telepathic conversations with these people. You just thought it was your imagination because that was safe. After studying Atwater's book and realizing this childhood NDE aligned to me in a certain way, I had to think back on all those telepathic people that I talked to. And one of the things I was born with was a phenomenal long-term memory. Short-term memory sucks, but the long-term is really good. So I could remember these conversations. One started with a mentor who was a psychiatrist. He was my best friend's dad, so he was a powerful mentor for me. Our communication, he helped me complete through just telepathy, because I couldn't talk about this stuff out loud. It was too scary. Who can I trust? So when people have trauma, if they are ethnic and they don't know who to trust, people go underground with their communication. And those people who are telepathic and are aware of it, and find other people who do the same. There's a lot of conversations going underground there, and you could be standing next to them and they're talking to each other and you don't know it. I actually had that happen. I was becoming more aware that this was real, and this is during the midlife transits of the 40s, or 39, 40. And I was like, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It's taken over my life. I can't deny it. So I hooked up with this one woman who's a powerful healer, and I met her uh, at an old Indian healing ground in Sierraville, California. This guy had taken me up there, and he wanted me to meet this woman because she used to rebirth. This was a place where they would rebirth people in the 70s. You can go through your birth again. And she did this for me, and we got this really strong telepathic connection. So me and this fella and her sitting at breakfast the following day, and me and her having this conversation, and she says, you could help him. And I'm like, I don't want to help him. He's got a lot of problems. And he's looking at the both of us, and we're talking like this. And afterwards he says, were you talking like that? I said, yeah. He says, well, I don't like that. And it's true. I think it's impolite. But so there's a certain respectability and responsibility you have when you have psychic abilities, whether it be clairaudience, which is telepathy, or clairsentience, clair feeling, clear seeing, what is it? Clairsentience, clairaudience, clairvoyance is clear seeing. How do you tell people? How do you be above board when you are around skeptics? How do you do that? That's the thing that I'm working on now. Well, mostly I kind of get away from people whose minds are closed. I might play with them a little bit because I have more confidence in my abilities, for sure. But it's just a lot more fun to be around people who are trying to learn how to do these things and how to open up to these things. And that's where the healing begins, because I was there. I was there. I was scared. I had no one to talk to. I was afraid of going crazy. I mean, they're going to lock me up if I start talking about this. They're going to put me on medication. And you probably, Jeff, have talked to people already who've had the same experiences, who have been afraid that if I talk about this, they're going to put me on medication, or parents trying to help their kids with these abilities. This is wonderful that this is being talked about now, so they can get the appropriate guidance. So I feel really free, and it's a magical experience for me now. And when I get around people who also have their own abilities, that vibration is really high around us, and we can share these experiences. I send pictures to people. There's some people who I can actually send. So I work with contractors because I like to build things. And if I'm working with a designer or a carpenter, I have a picture in my mind and I send it to them. It's automatic. I don't even think it. I've always done that. And they're like, oh, I got it. And they literally see the picture I sent them, whether they're aware of it or not. And when I can work with a person like that, that's a strong connection. So a healer understands that if you have a clairvoyant or clairaudient or clairsentient connection with somebody, you feel the sentience in your gut. You hear the sound coming from usually one side. For me, it's the right side. Or you have the vision, it's right here. And when you're connected to the chakra spaces, the chakras, that's where you get these visions or the hearing or the gut, and you're meeting somebody and it's, wow, you're on the same level. It's wonderful. There's a certain amount of trust that gets built, because my upbringing taught me not to trust anybody. Don't say anything, they'll lock you up. Don't say anything, they will take you away from the family. You can't talk about this, it's bad. It isn't. It's wonderful. So that's what I'm here to say. And I'm glad that people are finally waking up to the realities of this.
Cathy, thank you for sharing your experience with us. If we go back to the beginning, were these beings tall, skinny and light, like light beings, or could you actually make out their features?
We were in a dark space, something Atwater calls the dark light. I didn't realize that it actually had a name, but it was the dark light. So I went to the dark light, not the tunnel, which is why even when I started studying NDEs, I never thought of it as an NDE because I didn't go to the light. So they were in the shadows. Given that there was a lot of years, maybe 40 years in recollecting it, and I remember a lot of the details, I don't know how much I sort of colored it, but I do think they were wearing brown robes, like monks' robes. Once again, brown is a darker color. Their faces were in shadow, as if you're seeing somebody in a very dimly lit room. They were male, for sure. That presence to me was male.
Do you think that those two guys were your personal spirit guides or just beings that were operating in that realm?
I've had a psychic or two tell me that they are my guides, but when I first told the story, the whole setup for me to tell the story was set up in a magical way. I won't tell that because it was just two of these people that came to a meeting of four people at an IHANS meeting in Connecticut, if you can believe it. And they asked me that question. They said, "Who do you think these beings were? And where did you think you went?" Well, I went to the black. That's what I called it then. I always thought of it as the black. And I called those beings the keepers of the dark. I actually had names for them because I couldn't figure out who they were. And to me, where I went, because as you're crossing over, and a lot of people going swoop right up to towards the light or to their glorious places where they go, there's different dimensions. People say maybe 6, 7, or 8. Doesn't matter. I believe I went over to maybe 2 or 3 over in the dimensions, and because I'm a child, they see I'm going there and they need to stop me because people get lost in there. This is this one dimension that's totally black. You go to the next level and there's these little twinkling lights, but they're to catch the people that are going to that space and they get lost because it's vast. So I call them the keepers of the dark because they were trying to keep me from getting lost in that space, or because I wasn't meant to go over there as I was heading. That's as far as I can tell.
It's interesting that PMH calls that realm the black light. Usually we refer to it as the black void, but I've
Mhm.
never heard
Yeah.
her say that. Maybe I should get her back on and talk to her about that.
I think she calls it the black light. Not everybody's experience is in the black light. So for some people, it's been terrifying. And so maybe that's just why she does that. It doesn't feel like a void to me. It feels vast, almost like a black hole.
Did it feel thick and velvety?
Yeah, I think so.
That's a common description of it.
Given that it was not scary, and if you think about touching velvet and how lovely it feels and against your skin is soothing, yeah, I would say that. Almost in the memory to think of it almost misty, and yet looking off in the distance, it's the darkest black you could ever imagine. Yeah.
Even though you didn't consider yourself as having a near-death experience, somehow you got involved with IANs. How did that happen?
Okay. Ah, okay. Well, I've always been interested in weird stuff. So I started studying astrology when I was 19 and I kept studying it. I also tried to be a born again Christian. I was on a spiritual path for sure. I was born to be on a spiritual path and really make a lot of transformational changes. That was my path because of the mental illness stuff. Um, After the first marriage didn't work, it all was a result of having been born again Christians, and you had to do those things. And I said, okay, this isn't working. It's just too narrow. It's too narrow for what I understand to follow this path. And I started doing a lot of dating after that. I didn't tell anybody yet about my spirituality. I didn't disclose it when I dated. I just was going after these real heady engineer types, and it was empty. I couldn't share who I was. So I decided to, on a dating app, saying, it's a dating app. I can be who I want. So I'm putting this out there. And I started exploring with other people about psychic abilities, and this is what I'm into. I study astrology, and I started getting men that were more like, had my interests. It was great. I said, wow, there's a lot of people that are into this, and there's men that are into it. And then I met this one fella who had had a car accident. He had an NDE in that car accident. He was up in Lake Tahoe, and it had only been, I think, a year or two. And he started drinking as a result of this. I mean, he'd already done drinking, but because he had this, he didn't know what to do about it and who to talk to about it. He was a Pisces. He just drank a lot. And then he found out about ions and asked me if I would go with him. And we went to a house in Berkeley, California, with about 7 people in somebody's living room. And I started listening to stories. And even then I was going, what? No, really? But there's something about your spirit that draws you to the right vibration that you're trying to go into. You're vibrating a little higher. And it felt right. It felt good. But intellectually, I'm still into this, oh, that's just BS. It can't be real. It can't be real. And it was sort of it gave me a way of studying it. And I was bi-coastal at the time, so I didn't go back to that hour. That meeting was an hour and a half away from the house. But when I got to Connecticut, I looked it up. I looked up ions and found out there was one only about 50 minutes away, and people carpooled up there from my area of town. And I discovered the most remarkable people, the most trustworthy. But by that time, because I had been kind of developing my abilities and honing in on them, I went to Berkeley Psychic Institute to learn how to use was this telepathy and these other things that I was given that I didn't understand. I had to learn how to use them because they were taking over my life. It's like cutting off half my body to not acknowledge that we are spiritual beings and these are my abilities, and they're use them for good. I've been using them in my nursing career my whole time to talk to people and communicate with them on other levels and kind of get a feeling, and using my feeling senses. All nurses do this if they're any good. I'm about to say. So I had to just become more conscious, put them more in conscious control. So that ions journey sort of started there and gave me direction. And now that I've met so many people who've had them, it's become my soul group. I can look at, I remember was working in a nursing home not too long ago, and there was this fella, I worked night shift. There was this fella, nobody liked him because he'd pee off the side of his bed and he'd walk on the urine when you walked in his room, and especially at night. Well, that was because nobody would give him his urinals where he could reach it. And so I started chatting with him because that's what I like. I like people who are difficult. It was in my upbringing, don't you know? Well, after a few months, I got to try to pull him out, talk to him. He was just a cranky old guy, barely get out of bed. Went to the hospital, had pneumonia. They coded him. He came back to the nursing home, and I saw him and I said, oh, I'll call him Mr. Sullivan. Oh, Mr. Sullivan, I heard you almost died. And he comes up to the nurse's station before I go home, and he's never done that before. I said, oh, I hear you almost died. And he goes, yep, yep. And he's got a smile on his face. I recognized it right away. He had an NDE. I saw it. I don't know, it was the vibe or what it was that made me just say, oh, you must have saw the light, huh? And he's, yep. And I said, well, good for you. And this is the nurse's station during change of shift. And they're all looking at me like I'm a weirdo. But I knew exactly what was happening. A week later, he died. He said, I'm out of here. I'm done with this place. So these have been the kind of experiences through my nursing career. They've changed now because of the involvement with INs and validating my experience and hearing other people's stories. Now it's more of my conscious control. I can tell if someone if they're a patient of mine, if we're waking them up from a code, if I can talk to them about it. And I will bring it up. I will bring it up because they need to be validated. And a lot of nurses will, but there's still, there's hundreds of thousands of nurses around the country. They still quit. But I'm really proactive about this stuff now. I'm going to find those people and I'm going to let them know that they can talk about it or let them know about INs because I wish I had been less afraid growing up. Maybe I could have done more. And now that I feel like I'm fully alive and I'm in my 60s with all the wisdom of the spiritual development and journey that I've taken, especially with my mentally ill family members, life is getting shorter all the time. It seems like a waste. Don't they say wisdom is, what is it? Youth is wasted on the young. It's very true.
Are you only telepathic with other people who are telepathic, or can you hear anyone's thoughts?
Okay, well, this is how I've figured it out. I'm a very strong sender, and I am pretty good at receiving. There's a look people give you. They're not saying anything out loud. They sometimes will present a telepathic hello. And then I'll know we can talk or communicate that way. Sometimes I don't even know I'm doing it. It sounds like I'm speaking out loud. Anyway, some voices are so quiet, they sound like a whisper in my head. They sound like a whisper in my head. And even my guides, I have to tell my guides, turn it up because I can't hear you. They're just not strong senders. And maybe they're not strong senders because they're not aware that they're telepathic and aren't using it. They haven't enabled it. It's still a question as to whether, am I actually hearing this person? So yeah. And if that's the case, I know what they want. I don't have to hear the words. I'm answering the question. I didn't hear it out loud as I can in my head on this side. But I already answered the question. I already know because I got it telepathically. It went into some place that processed it and said, well, this is how you have to answer it. That's puzzling. And it happens with my husband and I all the time. We bring up the same things we're thinking about at the same time. And after 16 years of being with him, that's common between couples. But I can't hear him. I don't even know there's something going on. So I'm working with that right now. I don't know who came up with the thought first. Did he come up with it and I picked it up? Or did I come up with it and he picked it up? I don't know who came up with it first. That's what I'm trying to figure out because there's no words spoken. That are loud enough for me to hear.
Is it always like that, or do you ever hear other people's voices, or at least their thoughts?
Oh, yes. What's cool is I've done speaking in groups and a question will come up in my head. I can hear the question. I could probably hone in who's asking the question, but I don't know who's asking the question. I hear the question in my head, and so I answer it. So in a situation like this, if there was a group of people, because I do teach astrology and I do some teaching, it's not unusual that I'll speak in a group and or in an IONS group as well. I can hear the questions from the audiences. I can hear them, and I'll answer them, and I hear them. Maybe not exactly how they spoke them to me, but maybe how their guides delivered it to me.
Have you ever had a shared death experience at work?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's not unusual. I worked in a hospital for 12 years, so this is a place where you are often around people who are actively dying. And one of the things that I was not afraid of is dying. The other nurses were. They were there to help people live. And I'm thinking, people die. What's wrong with that? So they would send them to me to talk about it. And then well, I do hospice now. One of the most profound experiences I ever had, and this is only after I awakened and became more conscious, willingly conscious of the powers, was I able to actually help somebody. And I was working in a nursing home here in Connecticut, and I've been involved in IONS for 10 years. And there was, and I do believe we get led into certain situations because their guides and my guides know that this is the right situation. This might have been the thing. As a nurse, I would float from different hospitals. And this was a nursing home I went into. The two daughters approached me. I was going to go take care of their mother, Rose. And they told me, my mother doesn't want to live. She wants to move on. One of the daughters telling me this. And we don't know what to do. We don't know how to support her. She's convinced us that she doesn't want anything done. And we just don't know. Well, cool. All right, I know what to say. So I told her, I said, okay. We went down into her room. I took a look at her. Her husband had died a year before. She wanted to go meet with him. She wasn't really talking or communicating much. And her daughters wanted to honor her wishes. So I said, okay. I gave him some instructions. I said, tell everybody that is important to her about her decision and that you're going to support it. And if she wants to eat, feed her. If she doesn't, that's fine. If she wants to take a sip of water, don't force it. Just offer it. And um, and then just wait. Oh, make sure you say your goodbyes and give her permission to go. Just, say goodbye, let everybody say goodbye. Let her know it's okay. Well, lo and behold, go about my work and, this kind of thing. The following week, I come back and I'm on the same assignment. I thought, oh, wow. Oh, and she's still here. I get my report. I go down there. The first thing, the daughters see me and they go, "Oh, Cathy, she's still here. Why is it taking so long? Everybody's here." Though, okay. So I go down into the room. She's kind of got the Kussmaul's breathing, which is a very shallow and then very rapid. And this is when somebody's actively dying. This is what they do. And I see she's hanging on. So I go to her foot of the bed and I touch her foot and telepathically I say to her, I say, Rose, it's time to let go. And immediately I hear one of the daughters say, no. And then all got quiet. The daughter realized that she was the one hanging on to her and then immediately said, it's okay, Mom. I'm just barely in tears right now telling this story. Every time I retell it, I have less tears. So the tears are still there because it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever witnessed, that I had a real position in helping this family. And I realized, okay, that was what it took. The daughter wasn't willing to let her go. I backed out of the room. I said, hey, until later, go back to do my other assignment. And I don't know why, but they changed my assignment. I'd gotten my report. I was starting to do my work. They put me on another floor. I couldn't figure that out. But I did find out that 20 minutes after that moment that I had with the family, they pronounced her. Okay. So the next part of this is I still smoked cigarettes back then. And I think I went out to have a cigarette before I got started on the next assignment that they moved me to. And here she comes. She comes to the right side of my head. I see her just like a head in my mind's eye. And I'm a little astounded at, I know it's her. And she says, where do I go? And I'm in my head, and I'm looking down to a light in the tunnel, and I look down there, I say, "Go to the light." And she looks down the tunnel, and I say, "Yeah, go to the light." And boom, she took off. Going, "Oh, that was weird. What was that?" Wow, and it was real. I knew it was her. So I sent her off to the light, and then it was a Saturday assignment. So I went home and I called my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, and started telling him this experience. I says, "I gotta tell you what happened. This is so weird." And he says to me, and he's open-minded, he doesn't have a lot of his own conscious psychic abilities, but he does study Buddhism. And he said, "Oh, well, that's interesting because the Buddhists believe that when your spirit first detaches from your body, you're at first disoriented." I thought, yeah, she was disoriented. She came to me to guide her. Like, wow, that's perfect. But more than that, he didn't say, "Oh, that's stupid," or "That's weird." He didn't say that at all. He gave me some really useful information. So, of course, I married him a year later. But that's another story. Yes, that was the most profound near death, shared death experience I've ever had with anybody. But I've had the little ones,
If you had a friend that was grieving over the loss of a loved one, what type of advice would you give?
Part of it is I have to find out what her beliefs are. I've I need to honor other people's beliefs. Um, Hopefully I would know what they are. And this happens a lot. I do help a lot of grieving people. So there is it's very common for others now to realize that soul goes on, and they still can be in communication with that soul. And more than anything, explore the experiences of what that might look like in a person's life. But probably if I didn't know anything about that person, I'd probably say, um, boy, you're going to be okay. You will get through it. You will get through this. It's really the only thing you can say. Well, there was a situation most recently with the death. Um, I'm not really sure how I can't remember the story, but yes, it's almost like spirit led. If I'm in the presence of somebody and I don't know them, I just kind of check in with my gut and may ask for some guidance on how to guide this person. Because we all have egos. Our ego will be the one in charge. And I'm a Leo. Hardly any zodiac sign has a bigger ego than a Leo. And I'm aware of that. So I have to kind of move that aside and ask for the guidance and let that be what comes out of my mouth. I do a lot better if I do that instead of me just being like, "Well, this is what I should say, and this is how I should judge that." No, I know better now that it should come from some type of soul source that knows that person I'm saying it to more than I do.
This may be a little bit off subject, but is there anything about NDEs and SDEs and being telepathic and psychic that verifies astrology?
Mm. Well, yeah. Astrology is one of those things that divides religion and mysticism into two separate categories. And if I were to look at a person's chart, you would see that. You would see if they're more theological, on an intellectual based understanding, which my husband is. He's an air sign, or they're watery, like a Pisces, whose journey here is really difficult because they live in the mystical all the time. They're buffeted constantly by psychic forces, and they need to get a control over it. Um, And I use that to understand, to get a language for it, let's say, in studying astrology. It gave me a language for the mystical forces on the earth, where you don't get that in nursing school or psychology school, or uh, it's these two worlds. eh, they collide, and I've learned how to speak to both sides. I'm very much into the science. To me, I follow the science, and there is a lot more science around vibrational forces. I mean, let's face it, we only have a certain level of a color spectrum. We only hear things on a certain auditory level. Our smellers are only so good. And when you go to that other side, you see it all, you hear it all, you feel it all. Oh my God, look at this. So we're very limited. We have very limited ways of understanding what's really there and available to us. So you have to find another way, a sixth sense of understanding that world and just trusting. Somebody just recently said that we're here to learn faith. Faith that all will work out. All is, we are all on a path, and we can have what we need, that we can understand what we seek, and that there is some God force, whether you use religion to understand it or you go the more mystical route. That's our path, all of us. If we want to be educators and just think on this linear level, that's fine. It's okay. I tend to go more towards the people who are more mystically inclined, because that's how I'm learning. That's what I want to learn. Yeah.
After watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Oh, yeah.
What's the best way to contact you?
Probably through my Milford Mental Health, milfordmentalhealth@gmail.com.
Is there anything that you're working on that you want people to know about?
Sure. Um, I'm a memoir writer, and I wrote a memoir, but it was about my coming of age in this mental health, mentally ill family, really. And, but it doesn't talk much about the NDE. It doesn't at all. I don't talk about that at all. I just talk about being a young woman, being raised by men, and having to basically do it on my own, and how difficult that was, the mental health stuff. I do want to write a couple more memoirs, and one of them will be about my mother's journey through the mental health system, because she was a patient at Danvers Psychiatric Hospital in Massachusetts, in Danvers. And I found out that they archived the records as historical documents when she was a patient there. So I'm working on getting those documents so I can write her story of a woman, my mother, and because I'm we're trying to figure out what schizophrenia is. And when I read her letters and her experiences in these institutions where there are a lot of bad spirits, is Mary and Elizabeth, are they beings, or is this something in her mind that she made up? I've had psychics say that, oh, those are her beings. I thought, well, they're not helping her because she's a mad woman, and I relate to her. So for me, I want to try to find, schizophrenia is the hardest one, but more and more people learning about psychic abilities and NDEs and transformational experiences are really realizing that they're not crazy. Or my brother, who's really telepathic, he gets paranoid. He has these paranoia things. It's like, how do I bring him down and get him into reality? Maybe he is onto something. So there's some really weird things going on psychiatrically that it's a subject that fascinates me, and is something I write about. A lot of people have written about their NDEs. For me, it's a little boring, but to be able to bridge the two of what is mental health, what is real mental health, and how do you get there? What is crazy and what isn't? Those are kind of my subjects. And all I can do is write about them in memoir form and hope that people will identify with my journey and realize that you can get through it. You can come from a family that is so dysfunctional and come out happy, peaceful, accomplished. You can get through the fire. It's worth it.
Before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Yes. I think it was just that. No matter what you're going through, you're going to go through it and know you're going to get through it. And it's all for a reason. Eventually, you'll get to choose better lessons, but you got to get through the hard ones first. You chose to do so. And a little bit of faith that it'll all work out. Even if it seems horrible, just keep going, keep asking, keep seeking. Your answers will come. Your people will come.
Cathy, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.